Hi folks, Thibaut Van Dam here with another YouTube video. And for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, I am a DIY singer-songwriter and guitar tutor based in Southeast London. And today I'm very excited to say that I'm back in the UK. I want to address the fact that I missed last week's video. I was traveling throughout the US and Canada, and I'm finally back, so I'm feeling really good. I'm going to continue making these videos. This is sort of the goal that I have, to keep making these videos all about practical guitar and music theory on a weekly basis every Sunday. So we're still pretty early in the series, and the goal of the series is pretty simple. If you are interested in learning how to play guitar, or if you are a current student of mine, these videos serve as kind of a reminder of some key fundamental ideas. And we are starting from the perspective of a beginner, and we're still sort of in that area, but over time we will be working towards advanced ideas, even for instance like writing your own music. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you and you want to be involved, please definitely consider liking the video. Please consider subscribing. It is the best way to stay up to date with the new content that I'll be making, and it of course continues to motivate me to make these videos. So thank you to everyone that does subscribe. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So today we're looking at a very important idea called standard tuning. And I realize there's a lot of videos out there that talk about what the notes are, and just what the notes are, and that's it. There are other videos out there that talk about, well, what are the main ideas behind it? I decided I wanted to make a very thorough video. All the videos in this series have been anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes. So I thought, okay, well, I could just do a video where I play each of the notes and that's just what it is, and take it as a matter of fact. And I will include the matter of fact information you need to know in this video, but I thought it would be important to talk about some of the other sort of relative ideas to try to sort of illustrate the major ideas that associate with the chromatic scale and standard tuning, and how it applies to this instrument in such a way that you can actually start to play things and start to think more laterally about the instrument. So the first thing I'll say is that in my last video, I talked about the chromatic scale. And I did say that the chromatic scale is probably just a smidge more important than standard tuning. And the reason is that standard tuning is a series of specific notes that are assigned to each of the strings. And those notes come from within the chromatic scale. So just to quickly recap, the chromatic scale covers every possible note we can play on this instrument. And at a certain point, like I talked about, when we get to the 12th fret, the point at which the neck of the guitar actually meets the body right here, this is the 12th fret, the notes start to actually repeat. And so this shows us something, that actually the idea of standard tuning starts to address this thing, that even though these are all pitched to a very specific note, that actually a lot of notes start to repeat. So if you were to look at all 6 of these strings, and you were going to look at all of these frets, you would start to say, oh my goodness, the combinations are sort of endless. But actually, when you really start thinking about it, for example, this note is the first note in our standard tuning, the lowest or thickest string in pitch, lowest pitch. This is the note E. This note appears also as the 7th fret of the string just above it. These notes are the same. Notice how they also sound similar? So when you're first addressing the idea of standard tuning and the chromatic scale on this instrument, I mean, if you really take a good look at it, it can be overwhelming, in fact. But it's good to know that actually, no matter how many frets you see and how many strings there are, and you could have guitars with more strings even, that actually there is a limit to how complex this can get, because there are only these 12 notes that you'll ever have to work within. So if you feel a bit rusty on what the chromatic scale is, then I do encourage you to go check out that video. I'll put a link somewhere in here, probably in the corner, one of these corners, I can never remember which one, but anyway, one of the corners, and definitely in the description below, so you can brush up on that as we continue throughout this video. So then, once we understand that key idea that standard tuning sort of exists and that there are all these notes and they repeat, this is a basic principle of the idea that actually, that in standard tuning you see notes repeating. And so this begs the question, why is standard tuning the way it is? Like, this is the kind of question that like 5-year-old inner child me is asking. Like, why is it standard? So standard tuning is standard because actually the way that the strings are separated actually means that notes are very easily accessible. They're spaced out in a very equilateral way, so that each string is separated by a very sort of specific amount of notes. And so you end up making it a lot easier using this standard tuning that I'm about to explain to play things like open chords. See? And so that is the ultimate goal, that we're trying to be able to play more chords more easily. Now, this begs another question, which is, how can we tune the guitar differently to get different results? For instance, surely you can tune the instrument to play this chord open, and that's absolutely true. You can end up playing lots of different tunings to suit what you want, and in fact, there's genres of music that are developed based off of this very exact idea. So, to keep things as simple as we can and to introduce basically the building blocks of all these other ideas, we need to know what standard tuning is, because most songs are played in standard tuning, although sometimes you'll see a half step down or you'll see drop D or things like that. But we'll explain that in a separate video. So here we go. In standard tuning, we talk about pitch basically from, in my mind, from the lowest string and the thickest string, you could say. I call this the lowest string because it's the lowest in pitch, but you might think of it as the highest string because it's the one closest to you. I call it the lowest string. The lowest string being E. So right now, my E is a bit flat. And just to further accentuate this point, I'm going to tune it flat, really flat. So now it's the note, that's the note D. So using our knowledge of the chromatic scale, I'm just going to go ahead and tune this string from D up to E. And if we just think about the chromatic scale really quick, we remember it's alphabetized, so we have to go through D to E. So you could say it's one note, but actually there's that idea about the accidental. So does D have a sharp or does E have a flat? And the answer is yes. And so because of that, as we pass through this, and as you hopefully look at sort of the tuner that I have, you'll see I have D, the note D, and then I go up a bit. And the way that I tune, and you'll see I pass through E flat, this is the note E flat, but actually E flat could also be D sharp, like I talked about in the last video. And as I tune up yet again, I sharpen, and eventually here it is, E. And that is the pitch of the note that we want to see on the bottom string, or the string lowest in pitch, just to be clear, this string. So let's go on to the next string. That note is tuned to the note A. And if you look, you can see actually we're right about in tune. So I'll go ahead and skip to the note D. That's the next one. And just to illustrate yet again another point, what do I do when the note D is pitched too high? So you can see here, I'm almost at the note at the note E flat, or you could say D sharp. Remember, the one and the same. So what do? Well, we're going to tune it down. So this is actually what I want to talk about. I want to talk about actually physically how to tune. So tuning the guitar, for the most part, all of these tuning pegs are tuned in such a way where when you rotate the tuning peg towards you, or clockwise, you're lowering the pitch. And what I like to do is I like to actually lower that pitch by moving in that sort of clockwise fashion, but in a rocking motion. I do a little bit, and then I go back a bit more. And I go a little bit more, and then I go up again a little bit more. And by doing this, it helps to prevent breaking a string instead of just going straight up in pitch, because that can be a bit abrupt, it can be a little bit extreme, and the result is you can end up breaking a string. So the goal here is to take your time, and that's sort of one element to be thinking about when you're tuning down in pitch. You want to rock sort of towards you and then a little bit higher. Now, to illustrate this next string, which is, you could say, the third string, you could say, because it's the third from the floor, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow, that sounded so out of tune. I'm like, ugh. This note I've tuned deliberately down to the note F, but like I just said a moment ago, this third string here should be the note G, right? So far we have E, A, and then D. Now this note is meant to be G, but it's kind of like a wonky sounding F. So let's again use our knowledge of the chromatic scale. How do we get from F to G? Well, there's one easy way, by sharpening. So F has a sharp, so it has F, F sharp, then G. So we're going to go up a whole step, and we're going to use this electric tuner to sort of chromatic tuner to figure out where we are. So as I tune up, you can see I'm passing through the pitch F sharp, And again, I'm using the rocking motion, but this time I'm doing it in the other way. So basically, when I rotate the tuning peg away from me like that, or counterclockwise, that's how you sharpen a note. But again, I don't go straight up like that. I actually do it in little movements, up and back a bit. And if I look, wow, this glare is really bad. But as I go up again, I have G, and there it is, G. And I just want to add a little side note there, which is that I personally prefer to tune the note up and sharpen it than I do flatten it. So if this next note, which is the note B, or the second string B, this right now is in tune actually. But if it was sharp, I'll sharpen it to the note C, and remember that actually C does not actually, that B does not actually have a sharp, it just goes straight to C. If we tune backwards, down from C to B, we're going to flatten it. But something I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go flatter than the note B. And I found, in my experience playing, that when you go underneath the note and then sharpen it, that you end up actually keeping the string in tune a little bit better. So here I've tuned it just a little bit up, sharpened it a little bit up to the note B. And this is how I personally prefer to tune the instrument. I don't like to flatten into a note because I find that sometimes if the tuning pegs and keys are not actually really of high quality, then the notes tend to kind of, I don't know, jump around or something. I find that the pitch tends to move down a lot easier than move up. So when you add tension, I feel it stays in tune a little bit better. And then this final note, we've actually returned to the original note we played, which was E. See, and notice how these actually have something in common. So we've now tuned up, we've tuned down, we've found each of what the notes are supposed to be. So to recap, I'm just gonna go ahead and play through each and every single one of the strings, and I'll say the note first because maybe you'll use this as a reference for your self-tuning. So here we have E, A, D, G, B, and then finally E again. So that's quite a lot of notes, but hopefully you can use that now as a reference. Now, admittedly, as you continue to play guitar more and more, this will be something that you will have memorized. You will have this in your mind. You'll say, I know E, A, D, G, B, E. And you'll know it and you'll say it in your sleep. And something that may help you get to that point is a mnemonic phrase, a memory device that you can use to remember what those notes are and in what order. So actually, interestingly enough, I didn't have one of these when I first started learning how to play. I just sort of forced myself to remember in the good old-fashioned boring way by like doing it over and over again. But one of my students, who actually the same student that had recommended I even start this series, Mo, he actually told me of a mnemonic phrase, this mnemonic phrase that I will be sharing with you now, which is the following: Eddie ate dynamite, good by Eddie. Eddie ate dynamite, good by Eddie. And I think the only thing you have to remember there is just to separate goodbye. Usually goodbye is a compound word, but in this case we'll say good and by, G and B. So Eddie, E, ate, A, dynamite, D, good, G, by, B, and then Eddie. So there you have your 6 notes all in all. So some additional things that I just want you to consider: please definitely get an electric tuner, a chromatic tuner in particular. Chromatic tuners will tune to whatever note it hears, and this is actually transferring a vibration into the tuner. So this isn't using some kind of microphone to pick up the sound, it's actually listening through the vibration. And it is really a testament to the fact that music and sound is a real physical thing. It's not some imaginary thing. Oh, you know, I just sort of, I hear it, but I don't see it, so it's like kind of whatever. It's not like that. Like, it's very real. And like, sound is absolutely a dangerous thing. Like, you know, sound has been used for like warfare and all sorts of crazy things, but it's a real physical vibration. So that vibration, when I play, that's what this tuner is picking up. It's actually hearing that note and the vibration. It's not using a microphone to listen. It's feeling the physical vibration, and it can identify the note based off that because of the point of contact that it has with the headstock. So that's something else I want you to consider. Now, I pointed out a moment ago, sort of at the beginning of this video, that there's actually a separation in between each of the strings, a very specific amount of space between each of the strings and the pitch that they are at, deliberately, so that way a lot of chords can be played open. So that we can play all the chords you can really think of, except for save for a few bar chords, really. But you're able to play the chords like A, or D, or E, or C. So these are, or G even, and plenty others. So because of this, I want to just quickly show you something I call a practical string rule. This is a way to remember which fret you can play on one string, so that when you play that fret on one string, or perhaps the next string, that you can end up hearing the same note or understand a commonality between those two things. I use these kind of rules in my lessons to basically illustrate things like intervals, like how do you quickly identify the perfect fifth of a note, or how do you quickly identify the major third of a note. And these are all relative ideas, and it can get quite complicated, but for now, the one thing I want to just show you is that if your guitar was way out of tune, you would actually be able to tune the guitar to itself. And the way that you would do this is by following a rule, a practical string rule I call the 5-5-5-4-5 rule. And when I say 5-5-5-4-5, I'm basically referring to the frets you would play and in relation to the strings just below and above. So let me just demonstrate, and I'll sort of point it out, and hopefully you'll get it along the way. But from the lowest E string, E, when we count from the note E up to the 5th fret, we have E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and then A. And notice how the note A on the lowest E string is actually the same note as the note we're about to play on the next string. Remember, Eddie 8, Dynamite. So think about this. If you play the 5th fret on the lowest E string right here, it's actually the same note as the open A string. There we go. So you play these two notes, the 5th fret on the lowest string and the open string just above it, and you end up actually playing the same note. This is a way that you can tune one of those strings to the other. And my rule of thumb is that the lowest string is always the reference. So I would play the 5th fret of the lowest string, and I'd play the string just above it. And I'll just show you, they're now out of tune. So you're gonna hear something which is basically an overlap in frequency. And I think in a way you could describe it as a type of phase, but basically, when you play it at the same time, notice how there's this kind of weird, uncomfortable crunchiness. Really doesn't sound good. And what we're trying to do is make those notes sound identical. So I can tell just by listening, this note sounds higher in pitch than the one I just played below it. So even if this wasn't the right note, I could actually tune the higher string to the lower note. And the way I would do that is I could hear that this note was sharper. And so what I'll do is I'll actually flatten the A string. And the way I'll do it is by playing both notes at the same time, and I'll lower that note. And notice how, as I flatten that higher note, that A note, they start to sound more and more alike. Oops. Yeah, I'm sort of doing this in a way where you can hopefully see the two different strings I'm playing, but yeah. And that sounds about the same to me. And you could actually follow through with that the whole way up all of the strings. So we've matched this A string to the same note. These are now the same thing, which means whatever this is exactly that many notes above that. So we could do the same thing by playing again the 5th fret on the A string and the open string just below it, so the D string. And they sound the same. And we could follow through. the 5th fret on the D string, and then the open G string. Again, they sound the same. Then here's the 4, so the 4th fret on the G string and the open B string. And then finally the 5th fret on the B string, which is the same as the open E string. So this is just one way to tune the guitar to itself. This is a little bit more of an advanced technique, but this idea of the practical string rule and the relationship between a certain amount of frets on one string and how it compares to another will start to become really, really valuable when we look at things like intervals and things like that. So I think that I've covered just about everything that I wanted to in this video. This was a long video, but I think it was thorough, and I really do hope you found it helpful. Of course, there will be timestamps in the description below. I'm sort of saying that for myself because you've probably already seen all this. But anyway, if you have watched this whole video, thank you so much for watching. And please, if you find it informative and helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to stay in the loop with our next week's video on next Sunday. And of course, it continues to motivate me to make these videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next one. Ciao for now.